The overlooked village of Nkosi, surrounded by thick jungles and undulating hills, stood a house that instilled fear in the hearts of all who saw it. The structure was crumbling, its windows shattered and the wooden beams rotting, leaning precariously as if the ground sought to engulf it. This was the dwelling of the infamous witch, Bloody Mary, who had terrorized the village for generations. According to local lore, Mary had once been a gentle healer, cherished by the villagers for her herbal remedies and potions. However, envy festered among the people, and rumors of dark sorcery began to circulate. When a terrible disease ravaged Nkosi, many pointed fingers at Mary. In a fit of collective fury, the villagers seized her, dragging her to the village square, accusing her of witchcraft and lighting the pyre. Yet, as the flames consumed her, Mary vowed to seek revenge. With her final breath, she cursed Nkosi, vowing to rise from the dead and claim the souls of those who had betrayed her. The village, once lively and full of color, had deteriorated into a mere shadow of its past. The homes lay empty, with only a handful of families remaining, too impoverished or too stubborn to abandon their ancestral land. No one dared approach the old house, for it was said that Bloody Mary's spirit still resided there, forever waiting and watching. At night, strange lights could be seen flickering in the windows, and the distant sound of whispered voices would carry on the wind. Some claimed to have heard the sound of scratching, like nails dragging against wood, coming from the inside. Others swore they saw the figure of a woman in the window, her eyes glowing red, staring out into the darkness. One stormy evening, a young woman named Clara, who had just moved to Black Hollow, heard the stories from the locals at the tavern. Unlike the others, Clara was curious. She didn't believe in ghosts or curses. She was a skeptic, and the thought of a haunted house intrigued her more than it frightened her. That night, she decided to visit the house. Armed with nothing but a lantern and her courage, she walked through the overgrown path that led to the cursed place. The wind howled, and the branches of the trees reached out like skeletal hands, trying to stop her. But Clara pressed on. As she approached the house, a chill ran down her spine. The air felt thick, heavy, as though the ground itself was alive, pulsing with something unseen. The front door, barely hanging on its hinges, creaked open as though inviting her inside. Inside, the house was dark and cold. The smell of damp wood and decay filled her nostrils. The floorboards groaned under her weight, and every step she took seemed to echo louder than the last. Shadows danced along the walls, their shapes twisting and morphing into faces that leered at her. But Clara pressed on, determined to prove the stories wrong. She made her way to the parlor, where an old mirror hung on the wall. It was said that this mirror had been Mary's favorite, a gift from a lover long ago. It was also where, according to legend, she had trapped her spirit. Clara stood before it, her reflection dim in the flickering light of her lantern. "Bloody Mary," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The room seemed to grow colder. "Bloody Mary," she repeated, this time louder. The house groaned in response. "Bloody Mary." Suddenly, a faint whisper, soft at first, but growing louder, like 100 voices speaking at once. "Leave," the voices hissed. "You are not welcome." Clara's hands trembled as she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She spun around, but no one was there. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. The floor beneath her seemed to tremble as though something was moving beneath the surface. And then from the corner of the room, she saw her. A woman, dressed in a tattered black gown, her skin pale as death, her eyes burning with a crimson light. Her face was gaunt, her lips twisted into a cruel smile. The figure moved closer, her steps silent. "You called me," she said, her voice a low, guttural rasp. "Now you will stay." Clara backed away, her breath coming in short gasps. But there was nowhere to go. The door had slammed shut, and the wall seemed to close in around her. She attempted to scream, but her voice failed her. The final image burned into her mind was of Mary, her face contorted with fury and victory, before everything faded to darkness. The following morning, the villagers discovered the house as it always was quiet and deserted. Yet Clara had vanished without a trace. Legends claim that her spirit was captured by Bloody Mary, imprisoned within the mirror alongside others who had dared to defy the curse.
The night stretched endlessly, enveloped in an overwhelming sense of unease. Each second felt weighted, as if impending doom loomed over every breath I took. Stepping into the small, eerily silent neighborhood store, it felt as though the world outside had vanished into a void of blackness, isolating me within the confines of my own uneasy thoughts. The store was eerily empty, its stillness punctuated only by the faint, almost imperceptible murmurs that seemed to float through the barren aisles, like disembodied voices from a distant past. As the overnight lead, my job was to oversee the solitary night shift. I found myself wrapped in an uncanny solitude. The bustling daytime commerce was now a distant memory. An eerie stillness had taken its place, lingering in the air like a dense fog, yet despite the silence, there was unease just below the surface. I felt I was not alone. Unseen forces were at work. They lurked in the shadows and watched my every move with cold, unblinking eyes. I methodically did my task of stacking boxes and arranging items, but my mind wandered into the unknown. It was lost in a labyrinth of thoughts that offered no relief from the silence around me. The creak of the floorboards and gusts of wind against the windows conspired. They were a tapestry of unease that hung heavy in the air as the night wore on. I found myself drawn deeper into the mysterious dance. It was of shadows and whispers that filled the store. Strange occurrences became the norm, as if the very fabric of reality had begun to unravel before my eyes. I had carefully stacked boxes, but they would topple over. They'd spill their contents onto the floor and chaos items would vanish from their shelves. Then they would reappear in obscure corners, as if moved by some unseen force. Then there were the whispers. They were a soft, barely audible murmur. They seemed to come from the very walls. They spoke of forgotten secrets. They spoke of ancient curses and forbidden knowledge hidden in the shadows. At times I would see movement out of the corner of my eye. The glimpses were fleeting apparitions that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Shadows seemed to come to life. They twisted into shapes that mocked my sanity. Yet I felt mounting dread. It clung to me like a suffocating shroud. But I pressed on, and my determination to do my duties outweighed the primal urge to flee. But as the night went on, the line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I could no longer tell them apart. Each step I took felt like a descent into madness, my mind teetering on the brink of oblivion. Then, just as I thought I could not bear it, it happened. A chill wind swept through the store. It carried the faint sound of laughter that sent shivers down my spine. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, to confront the source of this spectral intrusion. Before me stood a figure in shadows. Their eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light that chilled me to the bone. It was as if they were a harbinger of doom, a herald of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. In that moment, I knew that I was not alone. I had never been alone. The store itself was alive with evil energy. It was a sentient entity that reveled in the terror it inflicted on its inhabitants. Fear gripped me. My legs trembled. I knew I had to escape the evil clutches of the store before it consumed me. With each step, the shadows seemed to reach out. Their icy fingers clawed at my sanity, urging me to give in to the darkness within. But I refused to give in to despair. With every ounce of strength left in me, I ran, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of impending doom. The air grew thick with dread. It felt suffocating, as if the air had turned against me. I burst through the doors, the cold night air slapping me like a jolt to the senses. It was a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside the store. As I staggered out into the night, disoriented and trembling, I had managed to break free, but the victory came at a price that still chills me to the bone. Even now, as I recall the terrifying events that unfolded in that forsaken store, I can sense its sinister influence clinging to me, shadowing my every thought and movement. Though I escaped its grip, I know I left behind more than just fear within those walls. That store took a part of me, a piece of my very essence that I may never reclaim. It stands as a stark, unrelenting reminder of the darkness that lurks just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to seep into our reality. Life in our quiet neighborhood in Nairobi, Kenya, was predictable, almost serene. It was the kind of place where everyone was familiar with each other's routines, where children's laughter filled the air as they played on dusty streets, and friendly conversations flowed over garden fences lined with bougainvillea and hibiscus. New faces were a rarity, so when a new resident moved in, it immediately caught everyone's attention. The man who moved into the old, vacant house at the end of the street was unlike anyone we had seen before. His name was Mr. Holloway, and he was an unsettling figure, tall and thin, with an almost ghostly complexion and eyes that seemed to bore straight through you. He didn't greet the neighbors or make any attempt to integrate himself into the community. He simply appeared one day, unloading his belongings in silence, and then vanishing inside. Initially, I dismissed his reclusive behavior. Some people value their solitude, especially in a new environment. But before long, odd occurrences began to ripple through the neighborhood. One night, as I watched from my window, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a shadow that wasn't his. It was impossibly tall, with a spindly, elongated arm stretching toward the window, almost as if it were reaching out for something or someone. I tried to rationalize it as a trick of the light or my mind playing tricks, but the sense of dread lingered. Then there were the noises. Soft whispers and faint footsteps echoed through the walls late at night. I would lie in bed, straining to hear, convinced that I was hearing things, but the sounds grew louder and more distinct, as if someone or something was moving through the house next door. One night, the whispers turned into a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. The next night, I waited until Mr. Holloway's house lights started flickering again. I crept out of my house and over to Mr. Holloway's backyard. The cold night air bit at my skin as I approached a window. Peering inside, I saw Mr. Holloway standing in the middle of his dimly lit living room, surrounded by a circle of candles. Their flickering flames cast an eerie glow, illuminating the dark room in a dance of light and shadow. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of melting wax and something else, and his head was bowed as he chanted in a language that was foreign and unsettling, filled with guttural tones and harsh syllables that seemed to reverberate through the walls. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed a distinct shape forming among the shadows, a figure emerging from the darkness. It was the same ghostly apparition I had seen before, now more defined and terrifying than ever. Its eyes were hollow, deep voids that seemed to suck in all the light around them, and its mouth was twisted into a sinister grin that radiated malevolence. The ghostly figure floated closer to Mr. Holloway, its movements slow and deliberate. It was a spectral entity, translucent and ethereal, yet it exuded a palpable sense of dread. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging on interminably as I watched the horrifying scene unfold. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, and ran back to my house. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to unlock the door and slam it shut behind me. As I lay in bed, the whispers grew closer, surrounding me. It felt as if the very walls were closing in, trapping me in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, I saw the ghost from Mr. Holloway's house standing at the foot of my bed. Its hollow eyes bore into mine, voids of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. The room grew colder still, and I could see my breath misting in the frigid air. The ghost's mouth twisted into a sinister grin, revealing teeth that looked more like jagged shards of ice, in a chilling voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the abyss. It said, "Now, you are trapped." Fear gripped me like icy chains, freezing me in place. When I tried to stand, my legs buckled, and I crumpled to the floor, my vision blurring as darkness closed in. The last thing I saw was the ghost's wicked grin before everything went black. The next morning, I awoke trembling, the sunlight outside a cruel contrast to the horrors I had faced. I knew I had to leave, unable to stay with the knowledge of what lingered next door. I packed hastily, desperate to escape. As I loaded the car, I glanced up and saw Mr. Holloway watching me from his window, his eyes filled with a chilling awareness that seemed to mock my fear. I turned away, slammed the car door shut, and drove off, never looking back, determined to leave behind the nightmare I had endured.